it's live streaming.
Okay, all right.
Okay, you want to check first before we start?
Well, yeah, Matt, you can go ahead and click it on, and then we'll just.
Yes, it's on now.
I just got the ding alert that we're live, so it's right here. We're on.
Absolutely wonderful.
Oh, I did too.
Good. Okay, that's cool.
You're on, Gail.
I'd like to bring Finance Committee meeting to order. It's 7:11. We have Dr. Fellner and Aaron Ivy. Present?
Yes, present.
Okay, we got all three committee members present. We got, next we need to approve the minutes of the March 18th, 2020 regular meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the March meeting.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, the March 18th, 2020 regular meeting minutes are approved unanimously. Next, we have the April 14th, 2020 special meeting minutes. We need a motion to approve those.
I'll make a motion to approve the March 18th regular meeting.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all three. The April 14th, 2020 special meeting minutes have been approved unanimously. Now we need approval of the agenda tonight. Is there any additions or anything?
Julie, did you say that we had an addition?
No.
Okay.
I don't. No, we have the fire in the airport here, but
All right.
that's discussion only right now.
I misunderstood. I thought Ms. Factor was suggesting something. I will make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the agenda and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, the agenda has been approved unanimously. Discussion items tonight is, first thing we have is the credit card policy. I don't know who wants to take that, Brian?
I'll start with that, and then I'm going to turn it over to Eunice for a great deal of explanation on this. It was passed at council the last council meeting, the first one we did online. There have been some issues that's come up with that. I'm going to turn it over to Eunice to kind of explain where we need to probably go with this. Eunice, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So at the last meeting, when this was presented to council, it was voted on, I believe, to put in a $5,000 credit limit. That is an issue because with what we have now and what this policy covers, we would already be over that limit. I'm going to kind of go through, I made some notes and some bullet points that I feel are important that everybody needs to be aware of, and how this policy was drafted and what was done to come up with this. The auditor of state put out a bulletin. The bulletin number is 2018-003, and all entities needed to have a credit card policy if they were going to have a credit card. We don't actually have an actual real credit card, but we do have charge accounts, and we have a Lowe's accounts receivable card that we use. When we go through audit every year now, Perry and Associates, for example, has done our audit for the last several years. I was questioned in great detail about a credit card policy or just a policy for our charge accounts. So in following the bulletin from the Auditor of State and going through their directions and guidelines, the model that I drafted is called a custody and control model. So there's specific things in the bulletin that makes it be based on this type of policy. So I drafted the policy, it was reviewed by the auditor and law director. I'm gonna address a couple of the points that I heard at the council meeting, some questions that were asked. I met with several banks, looked at different options for different cards and what different controls were in place, different things like that. One of the questions that is always coming up, both with audit and it was brought up at council, was the points, if we earn points. With this card that we are currently looking at, you do not earn any points unless you spend $1 million. Do not see us spending $1 million in a year on this card. So the points will not be an issue, and that was one thing that made this card more attractive. At minimum, there are 3 points of control with this card with the policy that's in place. This card it's called an LN1 card. It will allow us to run specific reports that will be required for audit. These reports will also be submitted per the policy to council for them to see and review. The department heads that authorize the charges, myself, anybody can log in and see this information at any time. So there's definitely controls in place. Then the controls when we go to pay the bills will also be there, just like they are for any other bill. We are already charging more than $5,000 a month when you look at our accounts, like I said, with Lowe's, Poland, Keller Auto Parts. We've already exceeded that. One of the things that this card is supposed to do as well is to be there for in cases of emergency. We're running into a lot of that right now with the pandemic that we're going through. But just as an example, if our fuel pump out back was to go kaput on us, the police department has to be able to fill up their cruisers to keep doing their jobs. If we put a $5,000 credit limit on it, they go through more than that in a month. And then this policy covers all of our charge accounts. So maybe we will have a $5,000 limit on Lowe's, but a lower one at Keller Auto Parts or a lower one at, so it can vary widely. And I fill out a lot of credit apps with different vendors. A lot of them are starting to require credit cards. So we're running into a lot of that. The controls that the bank allows, we can even restrict. You can say that you won't allow purchases at a liquor store. So if anybody even tries to go in and use it at a liquor store, it'll be denied. There's very strict controls that this allows us to place on it, which I think is a big plus as well. The other thing, we have a lot of employees using their personal credit cards, earning points. That's a no-no for audit, for one thing. But it also means that they're not tax exempt, so we're paying tax on those purchases as well. I went back and did a little real quick, pulled some numbers, and I only looked at basically 4 employees that came to my mind off the top of my head that use credit cards a lot for city purchases. In 2019, it was right around $8,300 that we paid reimbursements for to employees. So far this year, we're at $1,900. That's putting a lot, that's $10,200 last year, and so far this year. That's putting a lot on our employees, asking them to make charges. It's a lot of taxes that we're paying out that we wouldn't have to. We can establish accounts with these vendors and use the card, still have controls in place, give full reports to council so that, you know, there's no abuse of it. I think that we looked at this really hard to try and cover all of our bases. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what I wanted to address. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them as well.
So Eunice, this is Tom Fellner. How is this substantially different than what we discussed in the last meeting? Or is it just a clarification, or you brought some points up based on your investigation of going to try and apply to these different credit cards?
Well, if I'm understanding correct, I wasn't at the last meeting, but from what I gathered, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the only change that was made was that you guys voted to put a $5,000 credit limit on it. I need it reverted back to as it was submitted, because if you do that, it changes it. It's no longer a custody and control model. So we are not in compliance with the Auditor of State's bulletin. And like I said, it would put us in violation because we already have more than that charged on our accounts in total. So the $5,000 limit needs to be removed. And I don't know if the law director has looked at it any further, but I don't know what our other options would be. Like I said, I went through point by point with the bulletin and tried to customize this for what our needs are from what I see from the bills that I pay for the city.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Palmer, can you weigh in on an opinion on that, or?
Well, first of all, let me just say, Eunice has done a tremendous amount of work on this, and
Right.
I have no reason to doubt her word. And the results that she has found out. I think your choice is pretty clear. If you wanted to keep the $5,000 limit, as Eunice has shared, that's going to have the ramifications of putting us out of compliance. Your options are either to remove the limit altogether or to assign a new limit, which is substantially in excess of that won't run the risk of us going over that. Now, what that number would be, I do not know. I defer to Brian and to Eunice on that.
Brian, any opinion?
I see Eunice's hand, so I'll go back to my teaching years.
If you set any limit, you can't, let's say you're gonna say, okay, we're gonna make it $1 million limit or $500,000 limit. Okay, is that gonna be our limit for Lowe's and for Keller and for Cole? It just kind of, as I fill out applications, they ask the requested credit limit that we want almost on every single one that I complete. So it kind of opens a can of worms and puts us in a position if we're ever getting close to that and we have an emergency situation, again, I'll pick on the police department or the fire department since Chief Jackson's here. If he wants to be able to run his ambulance and there's the fuel pump's not working and, oh, sorry, we're at our limit, are we gonna have a real quick emergency council meeting and be able to get that changed in time? How it's set now, it'll be controlled in the system. It's not, it can even be that the police department would have one limit, the line department would have another limit. So it's very controlled in how we can do this. And in my mind, those controls can be set low. And then if there's an emergency situation, we can literally in real time change that. So if the fuel pump would puke, we could go in and change it. But if you guys are setting it, number one, if you set the credit limit, it's no longer a custody and control model policy. And we would have to come to you every time anything changes.
So the controls that you were alluding to are kind of internal controls. You would make a policy saying, hey guys, this is your limit on your purchase, yet it wouldn't be an official limit on the credit card.
No, it would be an official limit. So like, let's say, for example, we gave the line department a $5,000 limit. They could not spend over that. If their card would be locked at that unless they came and requested if they needed more. Or the water plant, for example, because like their pumps can be expensive.
Sure.
So, we could change it then at that point just by going in the system and changing it. But it is very controlled. It's not just a imaginary figure. It locks their card at that amount.
I see.
So, may I ask a question, please?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Balding. If we remove the limit to 5,000, you say that if we keep the limits in place, and I'm just trying to understand this, and I think that Eunice, did you call it as the verbiage control and custody? Is that what you said?
The type of policy that it is a custody and control policy.
Thank you.
That's the
Okay.
model from the state auditors.
Sure. So my question is that if we remove that $5,000 limit, which puts us out of compliance, and we put any variable limit on the new cards, would we still not find ourselves in the same situation of being in non-compliance?
Can I jump in on that one?
Please.
Just real quick. If we put it in the ordinance as a councilmatic action, that's where the problem is. You will have on the control end of it limits that are not putting us out of compliance on that. When council limits it, that's where the problem begins. Am I saying that correctly, Eunice?
Correct.
All right. Thank you very much. I mean, this is Ivy again. My thoughts are, we're going to be good stewards of this. We are still going to, as a full council, going to be able to review, the invoices every month. And I mean, it's up to, as far as Dr. Fellner and Mr. Baldinger is concerned, I mean, we're being presented with a situation that we need to find a remedy with real quick. And it sounds like you guys have done all the legwork. That's just my thoughts on it. I good faith and do what we need to do, and just make sure that, like you said, we still need to be able to review things, and that language will still stay in there. So that's kind of my 2 cents worth. If anybody's, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have.
Chairman,
Yeah.
if that's the consensus of the group, what we would need to do is have a motion, and then Thomas jumped in on this. We would probably need to have a motion to return to the original language as presented, and
Yes.
make the modification for council on Tuesday.
Right, you would do that either at this committee meeting, or you could actually do that at the council meeting next Tuesday. But at one or the other, what you would need to do is to amend it back, as it were.
Amend the ordinance, because it passed as ordinance 2020-15. So that would either need,
Well, the whole one, it did pass with the amendment.
it passed with an amendment.
Well, then
On the
you would
24th of March.
Yeah, it's the same difference, though. It's just amending an ordinance instead of amending a pending or that hasn't been adopted yet. But you
Right.
can tonight, or you could actually.
I would have no objections with getting it out of committee tonight to present to full council next week.
It's already been, it's already went to full council for the first reading, I believe.
It's already passed full council.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it passed on the 24th. And it
May I
actually,
ask a question, please?
yes.
Gail, may I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, who wrote the original policy that we've had to pass on the first reading?
The one that just
The
passed.
original ordinance that is now defective, that Brian's clerk pointed out was defective. Who wrote that ordinance?
I wrote the ordinance. The policy was given to me, and I'm
By who?
the auditor's office.
I did the policy.
Oh, okay.
And what that policy trouble was the amendment that was made.
Yeah, no one objected to the amendment at council. I'd like passing things on first reading as much as anyone, especially when it suits my purposes. You know how that always goes. But this points out one of the problems with rushing to have to pass that. Did the original policy even go through committee time?
Yes.
Yes, it did.
It got changed on the floor, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, that's whatever.
It was discussed on the last full council meeting that we had in person
Yes, sir.
for the first time. And any changes were discussed at that meeting and then passed. But, I've got no problem amending to get this through back to the original. I'm glad Eunice did legwork for us, as usual.
Absolutely.
Palmer, would it be a matter of striking a sentence or two from the amended or the ordinance that passed?
Yes, what we're gonna have to do is just take a look at the amendment that was done at that meeting. Julie has all this information.
Okay.
And just retract that and put it back the way it was, as you just suggested.
So it might be best to not try and amend it tonight, but wait until it's kind of in a rewritten form or original form next Tuesday.
Right, I think so, and that way you can, you'll have the opportunity to vote it on the agenda, because you'll need to do that as a brand new ordinance.
Okay.
Former ordinance. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else on that, on the credit card policy?
I have nothing. Nice job, Eunice. Thank you.
We're gonna move on to B, which is authorized bidding phase 3 stormwater project. Mayor, is that, you want?
That's ordinance 15-24 that was sent to you guys.
Okay.
Doesn't need much explanation. I think that's the three that we moved money the last meeting out of infrastructure into contract services so McKeever could finish the design. And this is authorization to bid the project.
Okay. So the design is paid for, and this is the project funding.
Yes, it's to authorize bidding the project.
Okay.
It's an issue 2 and a Fund 608 infrastructure project. That's the source of funding. Or I say issue 2. I should say issue 1, OPWC.
Right.
Showing your age, Tom.
Pardon?
Showing your age on calling it issue 2.
That's period. I was there when it started, so I don't know anything. No, that's all. That's really all there is to it. So it's just authorization to bid. We are quite a bit behind, and the OPWC, there was notification. They are not going to send out money for projects approved in round 34. This is funded out of round 33, so that money is sitting there. It's actually, we need to get this thing sold before July 1st. That's why it kind of appears on tonight's agenda. So if there are any questions, it can be prepared for sale, advertised, and bid before July 1st.
So this is in ordinance form, and I'd like to make a motion to pass ordinance 2020-24 onto full council for consideration.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the authorizing the bidding of phase 3 stormwater project ordinance number 2020-24 is approved unanimously to move on to full council. Next, we have federal funds discussion.
It's gonna be me, Mr. Baldinger, if you want. It was alluded to by Trish and others that there are funds coming in. You will be seeing at some point coming up some appropriations to allow the expenditure for these funds. We did receive, I'll call it COVID money, as it was indicated by Mrs. Factor and Chief Jackson, about $15,000. There's other dollars coming in. We received some dollars for the airport, BWC, we received rebate, I guess I'll call it, check that we get every year on that. That will be redivided. That is not specifically new money that I saw come in. There's more coming. Occasionally we don't know it till we see it, but it will be coming on that. But this is simply to let you know that there are some reimbursements coming. There are some offsets coming. I would also like to, after this discussion, talk briefly, and Mr. Mayor, if you'll want to jump in, we're doing a little bit better than we thought we might be right now with the COVID impact on revenue. There's still concerns. Please don't take me, don't think this is heading back to normal original budget, but we're a lot better off than some other communities. So that's all that I had. If there's some questions, I'll try to answer them.
Anybody have any
No questions? As far as revenue right now, Trish was asking about or made a comment regarding the health department. For what we can see, the state funding that was anticipated, you're right about in line from what I saw today. I'm sorry. Did somebody say something? That's about in line. We're a little bit low on income tax. We've got some information from Rita that they're anticipating some slow pay. We will see an erosion of payment from their projections, roughly 20%. We're still getting the local government funds. The worst care area right now as far as hit has been gas tax money. That's changing a few things dramatically. That may improve a little bit if we do open the economy back up, but I don't see us gaining that back quickly. Tom, Mayor, do you have anything to add on to that? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, Brandon and the mayor both are.
That's all I.
I can hear you.
Yeah,
Can
he
you hear
was
me?
trying to talk, but he was muted.
I'm trying to unmute him.
You did.
You should be unmuted now.
Yeah, you are, Brian, but the mayor isn't.
I know, I'm trying to unmute him. He won't. There, he's
I'm
unmuted.
unmuted. Okay. So what I had begun to say is that Lieutenant Governor spoke today that in order to get through the next 15 months, that they will use all of the 2.7 billion in the rainy day fund, and they'll need about that much more. So I don't think that we have seen the cuts. Why it's important for people who have some stake in getting what was expected or quote promised in the original budget. I think you'll begin to see those cuts. So I think that's what the state's expecting. I would agree and disagree with Brian on the revenues. I think that the revenues have not begun to fall off yet. We got a large payment from Rita that was really the first quarter payments. So we really haven't seen enough withholding data, if you will. So I don't see any reason that we would be immune from the same 20 or 25% that's being talked about as far as a reduction in income tax. The gas tax has started to slow already. You can see that last month was off about 1,000. We get about 40 grand a month, 45 grand a month in gas tax with the new rate. That fell off about $10,000. So I agree with the most of the revenue hasn't. I would say just as a quick aside that the local utility customers have come through at least this month suggests to me that those people understand that this is a small little co-op, if you will. It's not a big utility, and if they don't pay, we can't go on. So I've been real pleased about that. Again, I don't want to say too much because it's certainly too soon to tell, and I think that folks' resources are going to dry up probably beginning next month. But next thing I wanted to say, the comment on what Brian said, is this money is being pushed out. If anybody who was in this business back in the Obama stimulus world and that recession, when the heck was that? 09? I think that's what it was. Anyway, the feds are going to push out money and it's going to pop up wherever we go. I don't believe we have to supplementally appropriate at this point because the revenues to those funds that Brian talked about, the airport and the fire department, those revenues we're not going to hit our targets. So as the money comes in for the fire department, for the EMS reimbursement, that can pay right in to a 101 account, but the rest of the money that we're going to use to fund our police and fire department, it's going to experience some shrinkage. On the airport, the same thing. I would suggest the $30,000 that we got for the airport from the FAA, again, pushed out, just here, take this money, will be used to offset a reduction in the money that we have to pay for our overall maintenance, existing small staff that we have. And our largest expense out there is the mowing of the facility. That money can go to offset that. So I don't think we're going to see the need to supplementally appropriate. I do think we'll just have to plug those dollars in, and they'll replace lost revenue from other sources. In the airport, we're not selling as much fuel. We don't have as much activity as we did. So those other revenue sources beyond the general fund transfer, those will be a little bit under siege as this slowdown continues. So that's where I see those two chunks of money. And I expect to see checks being sent to the city of odd sort of where did this come from kind of origin over the next few weeks as the feds push out money that they've got. And I think we didn't plan on it. I think we'll accept it. I'd prefer to use it as an offset to declining revenue, not finding a way to spend more money in those areas. Well, and that would include that'd be my opinion about the health department. Any money they might get to push out, I would use that to offset existing costs, to the greatest extent possible. So that's really all I got on the I guess the financial picture, if you will. There's a lot of other things. I would say that our situation is different. The other comment Brian made about we're in a little different situation than other people or other communities. I'd say our situation is different because we've done a good job of building up comparatively large fund balances in the key funds that will be affected by losses in revenues. So anything income tax supported, we've got a pretty good balance there. Unfortunately, as we all know, the water and sewer balances we wish were a little healthier. But as we do estimates on declining revenue through the year, even if the economy and the payments don't start to pick up before December, we're going to be all right in all of those key funds. 601, 603, 605, a little bit different, and that is definitely too soon to tell in terms of whether we need to do anything in an emergency way to boost up the electric fund. So that's what I got.
Okay. Anybody else have anything?
I got one other thing quickly on that. Those are in terms of the kind of a new thing to think about. We aren't, so spend a little time looking at 608 and you'll see that there are 2 projects that we funded for infrastructure improvements. We're only going to be able to do the one, that phase 3, as we call it. Phase 4 will not be ready to sell. The money's not going to be available from the state for their part, and yet the spending authority is there. So we may want to look at that, and it may be worth looking at some reductions or some rate holidays on stormwater. It doesn't provide a whole lot of relief for the average citizen, you know, a quote unquote measly $6 a month. But I think people who have been down this debate or been familiar with the stormwater as it affects commercial properties know that there's a problem with what I would call a double taxing of the uptown properties. Both the businesses and the owner of those properties pay a stormwater tax. And then out in the commercial area, where anybody has any parking lots, that is not frequently disputed in terms of people being overcharged, but it's only because I think a lot of the commercial and large property owners who have large parking lots have kind of given up on any kind of relief. So if the city was looking at some way to provide relief to small businesses and owners of properties in our uptown area, something I think that both the federal and the state government have talked a lot about but provided very little for, you may want to kick around the idea of doing some stormwater payment holidays to give a little bit of slack to our commercial sector, and also give $6 break to the residential sector. But that's in terms of things we could do to help our businesses, and funds that we have sufficient balances that we won't have unexpected expenses in. That might be one that we could provide a little bit of a relief. It's kind of odd, indirect way to provide it, but again, anybody who has studied this from the point of view of the multi-story buildings would include the hospital as well, but it's mostly the uptown area, and then also know about businesses that have large parking lots and how we hit them for permeable surfaces and how that drives a fairly large stormwater charge. That might be something to think about. So I'm sure I've either piqued your attention or totally bored you, so I'll stop there. I think it's kind of a nifty idea, but we'll talk about it later. Or now, actually.
Well, how long would your holiday last?
So these people in Columbus and Washington give us some sort of relief. It's not funny, man. This is, and I've been hard, and I am very unhappy with state government because, as I said in the previous meeting, that our problems are coming from one source, and it's a state-run prison. But I won't go back into that. I don't expect us to find relief to be opened up again for several months. I would say it could be as late as July 1st. And so just as to answer your question, Doc, I would say, maybe for as long as the statewide health emergency goes on. When they lift that, then we'll start making people pay stormwater. And I'm of the belief we got to do something. These businesses are just going to disappear, man.
So how do we do that on the utility bills? I'm not sure how those are generated. Are we going to? Eunice has big shoulder. Are we going to, ask her to raise one on the bill? I'm kidding.
No, it's not Eunice. It has nothing to do with Eunice, Doc.
All right. I'm just
teasing. They have not had one bit of involvement in the utility offices. Now would be a terrible time to do that. It's nothing to do with them. We have three very competent people up there at the billing office. they generate millions of dollars of receipts. So, you know, they're capable people working in the billing office. Thank you.
Well, let's talk about it Tuesday.
I think it's the idea worth doing. I don't think we're flush enough to institute a small business loan program for the local businesses that have been shut out. This PPP is a travesty as it relates to the kind of businesses that populate our commercial and our small industrial section. You go online and you see who got that money, and make sure you're sitting down because you may fall over. It's kind of a travesty, but that doesn't mean that we can't look creatively about how to help our galleon utility customers who are part of our business community.
Good.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it before Tuesday. You know, anybody want to give me a call to discuss how you would operationalize it? I don't, you know, this is one of those things, if I drone on and on, I'm going to lose everyone's attention. And then I'll turn some people off on what might be a good idea because I got into too much granular detail. So I'll just stop and say we ought to look at a temporary reduction in stormwater, and also perhaps a business assistance program with our over $6 million of general fund balance.
I agree.
All right. I'm sorry I'm in such a happy mood, but it's when you're at it a lot of hours every day, it does wear you down, and there's a seriousness that you can't slough off with all this happy talk that we get out of Columbus and Washington every day. So I'm getting fed up, but I think we're here to try to keep our community going forward, because I expect nothing from Columbus except to be invaded with COVID from their state facility. And I expect very little out of Washington because, you know, of our relatively small size. So we gotta work to help our own business community, not rely on Columbus and Washington, or complain about what we don't get from them. All right. Thanks for listening. Give a prison worker a hug. It's not their fault that their bosses didn't protect them, and now they've infected all of North Central Ohio. But fair enough. Trish, you look like you don't agree with the thing I've said. The facts speak for themselves. The data is what it is. 70% came from the prison.
Okay, do we have anything business tonight?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, since we don't have anything for other business, next meeting I have on here is scheduled for May 20th, 2020. It's going to be at 7 p.m. That being said, motion for adjournment.
I'll make the motion.
Adjourn. I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned at 7:54.
Thank you, Gail.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great